Bill Weir. I'm the producer, and today I'm the guest host, introducing you, the viewer, to our regular host, David Breeden. David is the new Senior Minister of First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. David, tell me a little bit about yourself and the Unitarian Society.
Well, thanks so much for doing this, Bill. And I am the new minister at First Unitarian Society, started in August, and just learning all the ropes. And of course, First Unitarian Society is an old institution. It's been there since 1881. It's been a humanist congregation. It actually began the humanist movement. And so there's a lot of tradition and a long history, a long proud history in Minneapolis and in the larger humanist and Unitarian Universalist movement.
So you are a humanist.
Yes.
Is that something like a free thinker?
Well, you know, free thinking developed, well, it's been around for a very long time, of course. I think that the earliest recorded free thinking was actually among Hindu thinkers in something like 600 before the Common Era, when some Hindu thinkers began to consider themselves atheists and to question the entire basis of what they saw as the religious traditions in India. So free thinking has been around for a very long time. The term itself developed in the 1600s in Europe among people who began to call themselves deists. And those were people who began to think that God probably was the actual actions, the physical, describable, mathematically describable actions of the universe. And then that become those deists and free thinkers. Many of them came to the United States and began the tradition of free thought here. And there are a lot of us around today.
And many of the founding fathers of the United States considered themselves deists, did they not?
Absolutely. It was really the cutting-edge intellectual movement of the 1700s. And of course, many of the founding fathers were indeed intellectuals in their day. And so they knew all about the latest ideas from Spinoza and deism.
But there were some people, whether or not that, maybe it was it in Germany, a free thinking society or something like that?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, freethinkers began to leave Germany in the 1830s and 40s and came to the United States. They fanned out all across the country. There are still concentrations of them in places like the Texas Hill Country.
Really?
Even today. Mm-hmm.
Now, free thinkers, that's not free as in free to do anything.
Nope. Nope.
What are the terms to describe free thinkers, the kind of thinking they do?
Free thinkers believed that in order to have a valid opinion, it needed to be based on rationality. Scientific thinking, logical, critical thinking, not on tradition from the past, not because the king said so or the priest said so, but because it was a rational, scientifically derived idea.
Now, scientifically derived, not everything is going to be scientifically derived. I've heard the term empiricism about things that are observable. Does that fit with free thinking?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the tensions in free thinking and then on into humanism, and it remains today, is how much dependence do we put on just science, just logic, just mathematics, and how much do we trust the human heart? What about those visceral reactions? What about the feelings and the emotions? And that's been one of the tensions as time has gone on. Free-thinking people like John Dewey, he wrote a book called Art as Experience. And so he was trying to get at those ideas that pragmatism and free-thinking weren't necessarily antithetic to an artistic and creative lifestyle.
So you can have artists as guests on this program.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of our tenets is art is part of the human.
They don't have to be thinking strictly on scientific derived. They can be artists.
Absolutely, and I never even passed my geometry course in college, so
Now you have experience. You passed some other courses.
I did, yes.
And some of those were in English, I bet.
They were. I have always been more inclined toward poetry and the written word than I was toward mathematics or science.
And you've had some experience in teaching?
I was a college professor for 25 years. I taught English literature, the history of the English language, which I find to be a fascinating topic.
Yes.
I've translated Beowulf from the Old English. So I very much enjoyed that part of my life, but I retired and became a Unitarian Universalist minister.
Retired? Most people wouldn't call that retirement.
Well, a career change late in life, shall we say.
Well, welcome to the Minneapolis and the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis.
Thank you.
Do you think that most of the people there are defining humanism in much the same way you do?
Well, I think so. Humanism is an interesting movement in that it never has had a strict definition by any measure. And of course, that's because humanists themselves are often thinking for themselves and would define, this is the way I think of it and this is fine. And that has been part of it. John Dietrich, who was one of the ministers at First Unitarian Society, invented the term religious humanism. And by that he meant a religious form, that is, that following rituals and having a Sunday morning assembly, but that the belief systems were still based more on science and the here and now than in any kind of supernatural belief systems.
Now, you say rituals. I thought rituals were designed to influence God.
Well, they may or may not influence God. That's an unknown, but we know that people like them, as do animals. Rituals are something that we enjoy doing because it calls us into some pattern of thinking. It has been observed, for example, that chickens will do certain kinds of dances before they eat. And it could be understood as a prayer, perhaps,
Really?
or a thankfulness that they are expressing. And so we animals like our rituals. What rituals do for us is to call us into a way of thinking. So when we light a candle, when we sing a song, when we sing the same song or say the same words every week, that calls us into a place of remembrance that this time is what we could call sacred. And by sacred, we mean it's not like every other day of the week.
Aha. Not like every other day of the week. Mm-hmm. We're focusing on what? Trying to be a better humanist, or?
One of the theories of what religion does for the human psyche is that religion makes time special by calling it out, by doing things in some kind of a regular pattern. The summer solstice comes once a year, but how do we know that that's coming? Well, after we humans figured out that it was coming, then we could have a ritual around that. Mm-hmm. And then we could do it every year. And then when I'm 60 years old, I can look back and remember that I went to this ritual with my mom and my dad or my grandparents, etc. And then we have a way of marking time. And after we have a way of marking time, then we can make that time special.
So the seasonal celebrations, June 21, September 21, or whatever, mm-hmm. I can see that the first might be the end of planting season, the second mm-hmm. might be the beginning or end of the harvest,
right?
Depending upon how far north you are.
Right, right.
But, do you tell me? do you expect to have seasonal celebrations continuing?
Oh, absolutely. We have had them as a tradition at First Unitarian Society. People absolutely love them. We have people who come just for those celebrations, have joined up with our society because they like those so much and they're so meaningful to them.
They are. I've been to many of them and love them. And the work that goes into that from the leadership, volunteer leaders that create something very important. Have we yet defined humanism? Do you think it's clear enough to our viewers?
Humanism is about the here and now. We want to live now. We want to live a good life now. We want to do good and we want to be good. And I think is a good formulation for that. And part of that is the respect for others that comes out of what we must do.
Not just tolerance.
Not just tolerance, but radical acceptance of other human beings. Now, some people nowadays object, now wait a minute, when this term humanism was being invented, there wasn't a lot of mindfulness about animals or about the planet. And look where we are now with extinctions and global climate change. Well, that's a good point. And humanism really is not only about the human. It's also about our place in the natural universe. After one comes to the conclusion that we human beings are very, very special, yes, but we are also evolved animals in a network that stretches all the way back to the Big Bang. After we accept that, then it's pretty hard to say that we get to do whatever we want to the detriment of other animals or our planet.
I see here that one of the 7 principles that I've often repeated with others that Unitarian Universalist congregations affirm and promote is respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part.
Absolutely.
Is that what you were referenced?
Absolutely. The 7 Unitarian Universalist principles starts with number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and then works up to that, or outward to that web of all existence. One of the things that we have been thinking about in Unitarian Universalist circles is changing that inherent worth and dignity of every person to something along the lines of the inherent worth and dignity of every person and other being, which would include animals.
And trees?
And trees, and maybe even the earth itself.
Gaia.
It
I've
could
heard
be.
some people call them that.
It could be, absolutely.
That's interesting. But there's also on here a Unitarian Universalist Humanist congregation. That's how the society describes itself.
Yes, and we have our own purpose statement, which you have right there.
And do you care to comment on that?
Well, let me read it.
Okay.
We have 4 things that we aspire to at the society. The first is to live joyfully and ethically in loving, reverent relationship with humanity and nature. The second is to pursue wisdom through reason, science, art, and the stories of civilization. The third is to make the change we need for a more just, compassionate, and peaceful world. And the fourth, support one another's journey toward meaning and connection in the here and now. And I think that very well summarizes the basic points of humanism. Also, I like it that the first principle here is live joyfully and ethically in loving, reverent relationship with humanity and nature. So, and again, sometimes we humanists are kind of, well, aren't you just all about the human and how smart we are? And, you know, we're not really all that smart, and that's kind of the critique. Well, actually, I think that we, for the most part, see ourselves in the fabric of other existence, and we wish we were a whole lot smarter than we know we are, as a matter of fact.
We sure do. Now, do you consider yourself an atheist?
I don't. And the reason I don't is for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, to be really scientific in our thinking, I don't believe it's a good idea for an animal that evolved on the savannas of Africa to make huge claims about reality, because we're always discovering more. As a matter of fact, we know now that dark matter makes up most of the universe, and we can't see it, so we don't see most of what's out there. So that's one thing. And also, science is really predictive. So something is probably the case or probably not the case. So I would say, is there some huge deity as described in Christian scripture? And that's unlikely. So in that way, I call myself an agnostic. So to be truly scientific about it, we have to say, no, we really don't know. The other side of that is that I'm really not angry or anti-religion. Many people do fall into that I see it as a trap. We know that religion is damaging in many ways, but we also know that it has many good things for humanity, or it wouldn't have evolved in our species and stayed there for so long. So I think that often we throw the baby out with the bathwater.
But some approaches to religion are damaging.
Yeah, yes.
But you see, for the most part, it's helped people along the way.
Well, I think that we have to separate religion into two different parts. There's individual religion and what religious practices develop and do for an individual, and then societal religion, that is what society then expects of individuals. And those are two very different things. I would say that in terms of the individual, belief systems are very often comforting and helpful, healthy even. But in societal religion, very often it's about coercion, very often it's about control. This is the places where we get caste systems and gender inequality, we get people executed for not believing particular things. So I think societal religion is usually damaging. As a matter of fact, studies indicate that the more secular the society, the less murder, the less poverty, etc. So it's pretty demonstrable that the less religion, the better off the society on a societal level.
Really?
Yes. Yes, most studies indicate that, and of course there are some issues and arguments.
Does that mean we should dissolve the association? No.
Probably not. Probably not. Religion is not going away anytime soon. I think that that's one of the mistakes that humanists in the early 20th century made.
The so-called secular humanists?
Yes, yes. I think that they thought that if they only got the truth out there, that somehow everybody would suddenly wake up and not be religious anymore. That has not been the case, nor do I think it ever will be the case.
So you regard yourself not as a secular humanist, but as a religious humanist?
Yes. The real development there, again, John Dietrich, one of my predecessors, invented the term. And what he was doing was taking the term humanism, which goes all the way back to the Renaissance and was a way to describe the humanities, we now call them, those studies that really had very little to do with anything in the physical world. It was all about emotion and art and poetry. He took that term and put religious in front of it to say that this is going to be a place where we have a society, a religious organization that is going to be built on these principles of art and reason. Then secular humanism came along by taking the religious off and saying, no, we don't like that religious, and we're going to put secular in its place. And so secular humanism develops as a way of distinguishing itself from religious humanism. I think probably in the future, those two terms will both disappear. I don't find them all that useful. If you like to go to a community on Sunday morning, you can be as atheist and as secular as you want, but you still like to go have coffee with your friends, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, in the Unitarian Universalism, there is an organization, a Church of the Larger Fellowship, where they Could you describe them a bit?
Well, sure. The Church of the Larger Fellowship is actually very old. It developed in the days when everything was mail order. So they became sort of a mail order church. Nowadays, they have all of the great electronic things we have, and nowadays they have Facebook pages and Twitter feeds and Skype kind of conferences and that kind of thing. So there's all kinds of connectivity. But these are people who are separated away from usually any other form of Unitarian Universalist congregation, although there are some people who live right down the street from an actual building and still belong to the Church of the Larger Fellowship because that feeds them in the way that they need to do. And in our contemporary world where people find much of their interaction on social media, for example, Church of the Larger Fellowship is great. Back when I first started seeing it, it was just for people who are out in the middle of Utah with no, with no church around. We have many prisoners, for example, who are members.
Yeah. Now, I've heard from the Humanist Institute that they are developing courses online for humanists, and they may be adopting some religious education for children. And hope we can have the head of that Humanist Institute here sometime soon.
Yes, absolutely. And the internet and all of the media that has grown up around the internet has just totally changed the way religion is going to be done and thinking is going to be done in the future. When you and I were kids, and we, whatever church was down the street is probably what we pretty well had to belong to. In much of rural America, the choices was a Catholic church and maybe a Presbyterian and then a Baptist, and that was about it. And if you weren't one of those...
Here it was Lutheran.
Here it was Lutheran in Minnesota, yes. And so if you began to question that, pretty well you had to pack your bags and move to the Twin Cities or to New York City if you were going to leave that. Nowadays, you can be a kid in the outback of Minnesota or Texas or Utah, and you can say, I don't believe I believe what this my Baptist minister has been telling me since I was 12 years old. I'm going to look up agnosticism on the internet. Or I'm going to look into what is this about this Christian scripture? Is it really divinely inspired? Who is saying that? When did people start saying that? I think I'm going to look into that. And then they can also discover all the other flavors of religion that are out there.
Yeah. Now, what is the connection between humanism and Unitarian Universalism? You spoke about your predecessor, but are they different? Do you see it as two different things?
I don't, for one, in one way, because humanism could not have developed as a religious practice in the United States if it hadn't had the protection of a larger religious body. Now, it's hard to call the Unitarian movement in the early 20th century large because it was tiny, a tiny percentage of the population. But it was a religious organization that had organization to it, so that people were talking to each other.
Well, how many Unitarian societies are there? Unitarian groups here in the Twin City area?
We've got about 11 around here. We go all the way from very large, over 1,000, down to about 12 or 15 people. So we've
12
got
or 15 people.
all kinds of variety in between. And those go from very, very formal and theistic to humanist, atheistic, agnostic to pretty well just discussion groups on Sunday morning to sit down and talk.
Yeah. And I've run into someone who is a leader of a pagan group within Unitarianism.
Yes, Unitarian Universalism attempts to be an umbrella group for different religious belief systems. And that is one of the tensions in Unitarian Universalism itself. Unitarianism developed out of Puritanism, which is an odd place. You didn't expect that, but that is what indeed happened. And so Unitarianism was Christian until the humanists came along in the early 20th century, late 19th, and began to dismantle that. The Universalists remained Christian until they joined with the Unitarians in 1961, for the most part. Again, there were some humanist Universalists as well. But since that time, humanism came along, and then, well, people started saying, well, yes, but what about paganism? And there is, of course, neo-paganism. A lot of people remain Christian in the Unitarian Universalist movement. We have a huge number of people who are Buddhist or kind of, well, I kind of like Buddhism in the Unitarian Universalism. We have a Hindu group, a Hindu awareness group that's national in Unitarian Universalism. So it attempts to be an umbrella group. Really, the only requirement is that you, as an individual, are accepting of those other people without saying, as traditional religion does, look, I'm the one who's right, and actually you're wrong.
So, really, Unitarian Universalism is based on values rather than theology?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the old bromide goes, deeds, not creeds. And that creeds, of course, being those things that you must believe in. If you are a Roman Catholic, you stand up on Sunday morning and you repeat the Apostles' Creed. That is what you believe, or you're supposed to. In Unitarian Universalist groups, we do not ask or tell you what to believe. That includes being a humanist, for example. You don't have to do that. We don't have any creed. What we do expect is for people to act in a way that is loving and accepting.
And to grow their religion.
Absolutely. One of our principles is that we are the free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
Yeah.
And so free and responsible.
Now, we've only got 2 minutes left, but is there anything else that you particularly wanted to add in here?
I would love to invite anyone who doesn't know about Unitarian Universalism or humanism to look into First Unitarian Society or some other Unitarian Universalist church.
Why don't you tell them the address?
Come on by the Society. It's at 900 Mount Curve in Minneapolis. We are just above the Walker Art Museum. Find the spoon in the cherry.
Up the hill.
Up the hill. Find the spoon in the cherry and come on up the hill and join us. And
that's just off of Hennepin Avenue southbound.
Mm-hmm.
You turn right on, Douglas Drive.
Yep.
And then the next right is
that's us, Mount Curve.
Mount Curve,
Yep.
and that you're at 900.
Yep.
Now, it doesn't look like a church, does it?
No, a lot of Unitarian Universalist buildings don't have steeples on them. They don't look like churches. But we have a wonderful 2-story tall window that invites in the light and the skyline.
Yes. Well, we're winding down now, and I sure hope you feel the joy that I feel as producer of this series in looking forward to David being the host, having your guests on this program. So be sure to tune in. If you don't know where to find information, you can catch my phone number at the end of the credits. Take note of it and give me a call. I'll tell you when the program's on next.
Great.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.